We need to continue working together to ensure everyone who has a mental or behavioral health issue can get the treatment they need and when they need it. I also want to say that people with mental health challenges are more likely to be the victims of a crime than they are to be the perpetrators of a crime. But clearly there is a thread through these kind of horrific events where a better mental health support system would have made a difference and needs to make a difference and needs to be there for all kinds of reasons, and this is one of them. This is my last year in the Senate and my final Department of Education budget hearing. As a first person in my family to graduate from college, as a former teacher, as a former university president, I know firsthand the importance of education, both in an individual's life and in improving our country as a whole. As I reflect on my time here working on behalf of Missourians and for our country, I'm proud to say I've worked to strengthen our education programs that provide the most opportunities to every American. In the K-12 space, I've supported programs that provide maximum flexibility for schools to decide how to best use limited resources to address the educational needs of all children and their families. This includes support for key formula programs such as Title I, IDEA, and Career Technical Education state grants. During my time as the chairman of the committee, or now as the top Republican on the committee, we've increased funding for education formula grants by more than $5.3 billion. That includes an increase of $3.1 billion for Title I and $2 billion for IDEA. I've been a longtime champion of the charter school program, which supports the expansion of innovative, high-quality public schools. Coming out of the COVID-19 pandemic, now more than ever, parents need to be involved. Parents want to have the flexibility to choose the school that best meets their child's needs. This is evident, frankly, by the increased enrollment at public charter schools as traditional public school enrollment has declined. Given these trends, as you and I have talked about before, I'm frustrated that your department's moving forward with what I think are overreaching charter school program regulations that would create a chilling effect on the expansion of high-quality public charter schools that families so clearly want to have as an alternative. I encourage you to reconsider those regulations. Those funds were set aside specifically by the Congress to encourage the creation of more charter school opportunities, and your regulations, frankly, make that highly unlikely. I've also spent the last 7 years focused on prioritizing investment in bipartisan efforts to promote college access, affordability, and competition. With the 50th anniversary of the Pell Grant this year, something the chair just mentioned, I'm proud that we've accomplished a number of things there. Over the past 7 labor HHS bills, we've increased the maximum Pell Grant award from $1,120 to $6,895. That includes increasing the discretionary portion of the, like I said, from $1,120, I meant by $1,120 to $6,895. This includes increasing the discretionary portion of the maximum Pell Grant award for 5 consecutive years through labor HHS bill, which prior to 2018 had not been increased through the appropriation process for a decade. With Senator Murray's active help, as at that time the top Democrat on the authorizing committee, as well as the top Democrat on this committee, and Chairman Alexander's assistance as well, who was the chairman of the committee at the time, we also reinstated year-round Pell, a critical tool to help students stay continuously enrolled in school, complete their degree program faster, graduate with less debt, and enter or re-enter the workforce more quickly. I believe that one of the best ways to reduce the student debt burden is to help students identify post-secondary pathways to careers sooner and assist students as they complete their post-secondary education. Investments through this committee in Pell Grants, programs like TRIO and Gear Up are and have been crucial to helping students succeed. We built one of the greatest higher education systems in the world, in part because the federal government supports it without trying to control it. I hope we continue to do that by building on the efforts of the past and not completely rewriting a playbook that's produced great results in terms of the quality of higher education in our country. Therefore, I'm glad to see that this year's budget did not include the misguided proposal to make community college free. As you've heard me say before, if you really want to make college expensive, make it free and have the federal government pay the bill. While this budget request doesn't include any specific student loan proposals, I'm alarmed by the potential of what I believe and what the Speaker of the House and the President have believed and said in the past would be illegal student loan forgiveness currently under discussion by the administration. I don't think I'm in the minority when I say that it's really unconscionable that the 85% of Americans who do not have federal student loans would be stuck with the bill for this political giveaway. And if it happens, it's likely to happen between now and Election Day. And even worse, loan forgiveness would disproportionately benefit those who can and should be able to pay back their debt. This is evidenced by the fact that the top 40% of households by income hold almost 60% of the student loan debt, while the bottom 40% hold less than 20% of the outstanding debt. Let me reiterate for you and for my colleagues, student loan forgiveness, as it's currently being considered and discussed, would greatly benefit those who truly are not in need of it. If limited even to $10,000 per borrower and individuals making less than $150,000 per year, the Committee for Responsible Federal Budget estimates that student loan forgiveness would cost at least $230 billion, and those in the top half of the income scale would receive 71% of the benefits. This is on top of the $100 billion that it's already cost the American taxpayers to pause student loans for the past 20 months during the COVID-19 pandemic. To put that in perspective, we could fund the Pell Grant program, which is actually targeted towards low-income students, for more than a decade at the cost of these misguided, regressive policies. Finally, student loan forgiveness does nothing to drive down college costs and in fact is likely to lead to increased costs and quicker student loan debt accumulation than before, with the expectation that there'd be another round of forgiveness in the future. What Americans really need right now is relief from crushing inflation, not more bad policies that will only further drive up inflation. Even the New York Times editorial board agrees that loan forgiveness is, quote, legally dubious, economically unsound, politically fraught, and educationally problematic, ending their quote. I hope the administration will put a pause on this unfair, expensive idea and truly consider who it might be hurting rather than who might be helped. Mr. Secretary, as we work through the appropriations process and your 2020 budget request, or 23 budget request, I hope we can set partisan politics aside and pass a bill with meaningful investments that support fair access to quality education for all students. I look forward to working with the chair and others on the committee to come up with a product that we can all support before the full committee and before the House. Thank you again, Mr. Secretary, for being here today.
Thank you, Senator Blunt. Our witness today is Miguel Cardona, the Secretary of the Department of Education. Thank you so much for joining us today. We look forward to your testimony, and you may begin.
Thank you, Chair Murray, Ranking Member Blunt, and members of this distinguished subcommittee. Good morning, and again, thank you for having this hearing today. While I will focus on the budget and the priorities of the Department of Education, I must start by sharing that together we must meet this moment. After attending the wakes of 4 murdered children and attending the funeral of a teacher, Irma Garcia, who died protecting her students, and her husband Joe, who died of a broken heart, I spoke with teachers from Robb Elementary School in Uvalde, Texas. In between tears, they asked for help. They asked that we see what they're experiencing so that we can do everything in our power to help them and the millions of students and educators we serve across the country. So today, respectfully, I ask us to do something. Our teachers and educators did everything we asked of them these last 2 years. Now we must listen to them and act. For the last 2 years, with greater risks to their own lives, our students and teachers rose to the moment and safely returned to school despite fears and the risks that were associated with it. Now we must do the same. We must rise to the moment despite whatever fears may exist to support our students and our teachers. On May 24th, the following school children and teachers were murdered in one of our schools. Irma Garcia, Eva Mireles, McKenna Lee Alrad, Leila Salazar, Miranda Mathis, Nevea Bravo, Jose Manuel Flores Jr., Javier Lopez, Tess Marie Mata, Rogelio Torres, Eliana Eli, Amaya Garcia, Eliana Torres, Annabelle Guadalupe Rodriguez, Jackie Casares, Isaiah Garcia, Jace Carmelo Luevanos, Maite Juliana Rodriguez, Jayla Nicole Silguero, Emery Joe Garza, Alexandria Lexi Ania Rubio, Alicia Ramirez. We must say their names as we remember the responsibility that we have. Americans are looking to us to solve difficult problems. We should be humbled by this opportunity to make a more perfect union. We need to do better. Our kids deserve better. Let's find a path forward. Before I start, I want to thank you for confirming key education department positions. We're eagerly awaiting confirmation of additional nominees so that the department can continue its critical work on behalf of students, families, and educators. Today's hearing is about more than the President's proposed investments for education in the fiscal year 2023. It's about the needs of our students and how we can meet them if we work together. The priorities in this budget reflect what I've learned during visits to 33 states across America, in my conversations with students, with parents, educators, and leaders in small towns and affluent suburbs and urban and rural communities, including our tribal communities. Addressing opportunity and achievement gaps that were made worse in the pandemic is more important than ever. This budget focuses on this by investing in our Title I schools and investing in full-service community schools, which provide high-poverty communities with easier access to services for health and nutrition, enrichment, education, adult education, and much more. Let's also invest $1 billion in hiring staff to support the growing mental health needs. Students are 6 times more likely to access mental health supports in schools versus community settings. To address the teacher shortage crisis, let's invest an additional $350 million for recruiting and retaining teachers. I've traveled the country listening to parents. They share their concern with recovery. They're concerned with their kids reading at grade level. And they're concerned with getting back to school, not letting politics and division get into the classroom. Let's work together. The American Rescue Plan got us this far. We went from 46% of our schools fully open at the beginning of the Biden-Harris administration to over 99% today. With your investments, let's build more inclusive, affordable pathways to higher education and rewarding careers for all of our students. Let's increase Pell by $1,775 for fiscal year 2023 so more kids can get to college. Our budget also calls for investments in community college, historically black colleges, universities, Hispanic-serving institutions, tribal colleges, and other inclusive institutions. We're proposing $200 million for career-connected learning so more underserved students graduate high school with industry credentials and college credits. Our high school graduates need more options. Look, education gave me the tools to achieve the American dream. I grew up in a blue-collar community. I only had what my public schools offered. I attended a Title I school and graduated from a technical high school. I became a first-generation college student. I'm a bilingual certified educator who benefited from quality teacher preparation programming and good professional development. I'm a product of the investments in this budget. Education brought me the promise of this country. It made it alive for me. We must renew that promise for today's students and those to come. For the last 2 years, we were tested in ways we could never imagine. Through intentional collaboration and strong leadership, we persevered. As this moment requires even more of us, we must lead with an even greater sense of urgency. Our students are watching. Let's not let them down. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary, for a very compelling opening statement, and I think it is incumbent upon all of us to remember the names of those students that you said out loud, and our job here to make sure that students like them across the nation get the kind of help and support they need from the federal government. So thank you very much for that. Let me begin by asking you about the department's steps to improve student loan programs, like addressing the longstanding problems in the income-driven repayment program and the public service loan forgiveness program, forgiving loans for borrowers ripped off by for-profit colleges, including many in my home state. But there's significantly more work to really fix this, our broken loan system, and make sure that it works for all of our students. I've been very clear that this administration should extend the current repayment pause until 2023 so you can get all of this work done. I wanted to ask you this morning, what is the department doing to comprehensively address issues in our student aid system, from students filling out the Fafsa, initially applying for the aid, through the borrowers making their last payment or having their balance forgiven?
Thank you for that question and for an opportunity to share with you. We are really, as was described by your opening comments, addressing a broken system. Yeah. The system is broken. So as much as there's conversation about student loan forgiveness, we take the work of fixing a broken system very seriously at the Department of Education. What we don't want to do is end up in a situation where 5 years from now we have the same problems that we have today. Our FSA office is really improving services, providing an on-ramp with better communication, better support for our borrowers, better communication. We're upgrading systems that haven't been upgraded in 45 years to make the process much more user-friendly. The simplification process for Fafsa is underway, as you know, and you've been advocating for. It has to be simpler. I've met too many students who, by 6th, 7th grade, decided that college is not for them because their parents are afraid of that process. Imagine the talent we have in this country that's untapped because students are afraid of this process. We have a responsibility at the Department of Education to address, in my opinion, a system that isn't working for students and for borrowers. And we've done a lot of work to address loan forgiveness for those who deserve it, like for the public service loan forgiveness. Right. For the thousands of borrowers, 408,000 borrowers that have total and permanent disabilities, who's eligible for loan forgiveness but never got it. We're fixing that, but we're also improving the college scorecard. We're improving FSA Office of Enforcement. We're doing a lot of things to improve systems that are broken, and part of that is what you brought up, making sure the system works for the borrowers and they can get information quickly and easily.
You recently announced plans for this new student loan servicing solution, unified servicing and data solution. How will that make sure we have better accountability and high-quality service for student borrowers?
Well, what we're going to do is be more engaged in the outcomes of those services. We have very high expectations, and we're going to make sure that we have rigorous standards for those companies that partner with us to engage in. Obviously, we're going to communicate with our borrowers directly, and we're going to hear from them on the progress of that. So increased oversight, increased accountability, higher standards, better communication with our partners, and more communication with our students is how we're going to determine if it's working. Okay.
In my minute left, I just wanted to ask you about the backlog at the Office for Civil Rights. We have rising caseloads, large backlog. So I was glad to see actually that the President budget requested an increase. But just tell us quickly, what's at stake for our students and parents if the Office of Civil Rights doesn't get a boost in funding?
Well, we've seen an increase during the pandemic, especially of cases regarding students with disabilities, and it's our responsibility to make sure that we're serving our students and our families who are concerned that their rights were violated. We need to have additional staff to address this backlog and address the increase in cases.
And that's what that additional boost is for?
And that's what the fund is, the request is for.
Okay. Thank you very much. Senator
Thank
Blunt.
you.
Thank you, Chair. Mr. Secretary, as you know, one of the things that I've worked on hard, and this committee has too, is getting in a situation where we treat mental health like all other health. The department's budget requests $1 billion for a new program to increase the number of health professionals in our public schools, including school counselors, nurses, school psychologists, social workers. In the budget year we're in now, we provided $111 million for that purpose, which was an increase of $95 million over the previous year. Can you give me an update on what you hope to do with that $111 million and how quickly you think we're going to begin to see some results in terms of people available to fill the need you see in schools for these professional services?
Thank you, Senator. And first of all, thank you for your service over the years. This is your last hearing. Thank you for the advocacy on behalf of our students.
Thank you.
Mental health has to be significantly greater in how we educate our students moving forward. There were issues with mental health access before the pandemic. They're much worse. I'm pleased that with ESSER funds, there's been a 65% increase in social workers, 17% increase in counselors. But in my conversations across the country, it's not enough. We need more. And there needs to be long-term funding to make sure that these resources are available for the long term. And you're absolutely right. There is a shortage of school social workers and community social workers. In our budget, we have funds aimed at promoting a partnership between higher education institutions and K-12 institutions to make sure that we're producing social workers. And we hope to fund programs like that with these funds so that students have access to the supports that they need. Additionally, mental health support also includes access to after-school programming or engaging with a mentor or having other activities that give students an opportunity to engage in a positive social climate with their peers. So addressing mental health supports does include increasing social workers and access to community providers, but it also means increasing access to positive peers for our students.
So, Mr. Secretary, the money that was available to schools through the COVID pandemic relief, I think that money could have been used for mental health, maybe in the way you just defined it. Do you see schools doing that? And if they're not doing it, why do you think they're not using it for those mental health purposes?
Yes, sir, I do see them using it that way. A Future Ed report confirmed that a high percentage of staffing is aimed at providing more mental health support. I do believe that they're using it very well. I've seen examples. I remember visiting New Mexico recently and having a circle with about 15 to 20 students, high school students who were really affected by the pandemic. At least 2 of the students in that circle lost a parent during the pandemic. And one of the students said the only reason why he's back in school is because of that counselor that brought them back over the summer to connect with them, and the student is doing better now, but he said if it weren't for those supports there, he would not be in school. I've seen it firsthand, and I know the money is being put to good use, not only with additional social workers, but with programs that reconnect students that have been disengaged or family members that have been disconnected from our schools.
Well, I hope we're encouraging them to use this money that way and to use it in the near term rather than some program way out there, because just like you said, I think the disruption of in-person school and other things has created some significant challenges we didn't have before. I'm very concerned. There are recent news reports that data from individuals completing their free application for student aid was shared with Facebook through the Metapixel code. Could you talk to me a little about that? I think initially the department did not think that happened. but Richard Corderay, the student aid chief operating officer, said it did happen. Could you talk about that?
Sure, yes. What we found was in May 2020, during the last administration, the department inadvertently activated a more sophisticated advertising tool that did share some information, but not social security numbers, dates of birth, or personal financial information. Once we found that out, we immediately stopped that feature, and we're moving quickly now to investigate this and find out what was shared. And we plan on, we had two congressional update meetings already, but we plan on being very open and transparent about this information.
Well, I heard you mention May 2020. Let me just, to finish my thought out here, Corderay says it was inadvertently shared after FSA engaged in a March 2022 advertising campaign, and it came out later that that information was shared with Facebook as early as January 22. It could be there's also a January 20 or May 20 situation, but I think there are clearly situations in the current year where this material was faced. Thank you, Chair.
Senator Reed.
Thank you very much, Madam Chairman, and thank you, Secretary, for your service. In the 2021 State of Our Schools report, it was found out that there was an $85 billion per year gap between what school facilities need to be brought up to standard today, to sophisticated and relevancy, versus what the money has been committed by the states. And last month, my colleague and friend Bobby Scott passed in the committee the Reopen and Rebuild American School Act, which I'm the co-sponsor over here. And it called for a $130 billion investment by 10 years by the federal government to get these buildings up to speed. And you know yourself, they're closing schools early because of heat. Philadelphia, those schools weren't built when air conditioning was standard feature. In my community of Cranston, Rhode Island, they had to keep the windows open all winter and the kids in coats because the ventilation system and COVID was too much. So isn't it time we made a significant investment? I know the president has called for $2 million to have a coordinating office in your department to help move money around. I know there's funds in the American Rescue Plan, et cetera, but do you think it's time we have a federal commitment to fixing up these facilities, helping the states?
Yes, sir, and I think these issues are even more highlighted when we talk about school security. I can tell you, when I served as a principal of an elementary school, fairly modern elementary school, the cafeteria and the media center were the only air-conditioned spaces. So in May and June, I had a schedule of teachers rotating through those spaces so that they and their students could get fresh air and could breathe easier. That's how our schools are operating in many places across the country. I can also tell you, Senator, that when I visited schools at the beginning part of my time as a Secretary of Education, some schools' reopening efforts were impacted by the impacts of deferred maintenance. Schools that had poor circulation, poor airflow, and their reopening was delayed because of that. We do have to take a very serious look at our schoolhouses and look at it as infrastructure is equity. Unfortunately, there are different standards in different places, and we have to make sure that our schools are places where children can learn, where staff want to work, and it's safe for students. And I do believe our efforts are there to look at this, but I do believe a commitment is needed for this to take place.
No, you're actually right, and I think it's an equity issue, because you go to places in Rhode Island, Central Falls High School, which is the smallest community in the state, a mile by a mile, mostly Latinos and Latinas. They have a high school that was built in the 1920s, I'm guessing. They are going to build a new high school, but you can see that everywhere. We have in the United States an estimated 43 million adults who are low-skilled in literacy and 63 million adults who are low-skilled in numeracy. Mm-hmm. And in this modern, sophisticated economy, if you can't read and write, getting a job beyond the local fast foods is challenging. Do we have to do more to help adult education in the United States, increase funding?
Absolutely. I believe not only is it important that we focus on our adult education population because the system didn't work for them the first time around, but we also know that not only for their family but for their community, it pays economic dividends. Their quality of life improves, their ability to contribute improves, and there are programs out there, especially now with the economy the way it is and the job opportunities that exist. We need to do a better job connecting them with high-paying jobs. That's just quality of life for their family. And as was mentioned in one of the earlier statements, this has a multi-generational approach, right? If the parent has a better paying job, they might have more opportunity to be with their children at home and help them with their homework. So I do believe we have a responsibility to improve adult education, and there's an opportunity here for success for these students and for their communities.
Well, in the final seconds I have to mention the 50th anniversary of the Pell Grant. I had the distinction of succeeding Senator Pell. No one could replace him. And if you really wanted to feel good about yourself, you marched in a parade with him and you pretended they were cheering for you. So that's a very good technique. But we have to do more, I think, than just simply bump up the Pell Grant every year. And Senator Collins and I have the PASS Act, which is a much more comprehensive way to set goals at the state level for attainment, to have a systematic sort of from preschool, grammar school, all the way into college, so that they're ready. Young people are ready to go to school. So I would ask you to look very closely at that, Mr. Secretary.
Thank you.
And thank you very much.
Thank you. Senator Manchin.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Secretary, it's good to have you here. Thank you for being here, and thank you for your service. And next of all, let me, on behalf of the great people of West Virginia and my entire state, our deepest sympathy to the families and of the children and of the teachers who were lost in Uvalde in a horrible tragedy. Along those lines, school safety has been a major topic of late, of what we could have done, what we can do, and what we should do, especially following that tragic shooting in Uvalde. In March 2018, President Trump appointed then Secretary DeVos to lead a federal commission on school safety. That commission found that while there's no universal school safety plan that will work for every school across the country, the federal government does and can play a role in enhancing school safety. So in your budget, the department asked for $129 million to address school safety, national activities, $23 million increase. That includes $24.7 million for new grants under Project Prevent, and just $2 million for a proposed national clearinghouse on school infrastructure sustainability to help with technical assistance on school facility construction and improvement, which we might maybe recommend you might want to evaluate that and look at that if that's enough to do the job. Issues such as self-locking doors, armed security guards, active shooter training for teachers and students, bulletproof windows, and other training have all been discussed as ways to help students improve the student safety. So my question would be on the finding of the 2018 School Safety Report was an active shooter preparedness and mitigation. I know the department has undertaken a review of the report and was wondering what the status of that review is or has been, or where you are in evaluating that and if it's been implemented.
Yeah, we thank you for that, Senator. We take the responsibility to support the safety of our schools, our students, and our staff. It's the highest priority. As a father, I can tell you there's nothing more important to me than the safety of my children, their peers and their teachers when they're in school. Our administration is reviewing the report, the Federal Commission on School Safety Report issued by former Secretary DeVos. And as I said before, in the budget, we do ask for funds that can assist. You mentioned Project Prevent. $25 million there for projects to support community school-based strategies that help prevent community violence. There's also funding for mental health grants, $55 million for school-based mental health grants. This is going to be something that's going to be ongoing. And while the money is important, I think it's really important that the department take lead on providing technical assistance.
Sorry to interrupt you. Do you have any, do you all monitoring that to find out how many schools or school districts are participating in this actively? Yeah. And because this started back in 2013 right. with the Sandy Hook shootings, we did a bill at that time, which is a background check, but we had school safety in that background, the Manchin-Toomey bill. And that school safety, basically we found out that we should harden all first floor schools, with their windows and doors and bulletproof and lockdown and single entry. I don't know how much of that was followed through and schools that took advantage of it or not.
I can definitely have more information provided to your office. Happy to follow up with you.
Could, if there's
Sure.
any way we can monitor this a little bit. And,
Definitely.
And also, you have the tool of holding some of your federal funds.
Right.
If they're not, and it's so important, they got to do everything humanly possible. It's awful to look back and say, well, we should have done this or could have
Right.
done that. And I would hope you all would look at that seriously about using the one tool you have.
Sure.
Which is the money that goes to them if they're not going to use it to protect our children. Back in 1997, a young student from Fayette County, West Virginia, was killed by his teacher. That same teacher had previously taught at a school in Pennsylvania, but was dismissed following the string of allegations involving sexual misconduct with students. That teacher somehow received a positive recommendation just to get rid of that teacher from that school district and shoved him down to our school district, which has some horrific naming for this. And we don't want to go into that, talking about teachers and all the things they've said. But to allow this to happen, we have 130 teachers and teachers' aides have reportedly been arrested for sex-related crimes. So Senator Toomey and I, again, introduced a bill that's been put into law. So why are states that are not complying with the law still receiving any funding?
Yeah. We take the safety, as I said earlier, the safety of students very seriously. We published a report that was developed in last administration, and we're setting up communication with districts, or with states, and we're gonna have higher level of accountability and reporting on what is being done, and holding them accountable for complying with the report.
How does that teacher's record get transferred? So if in Indiana, Senator Braun's school district is basically going to hire a person that was in West Virginia and didn't know that person had been let go in West Virginia for violation to their students, sex, whatever it may have been, and they think they're hiring them with a good recommendation.
Yeah.
How does that get in the system?
We're going to strengthen the system to make sure that states are complying with the recommendations of the report and the expectations of the report. And again, it just goes back to making sure we're holding states accountable for following the law.
And my final question, I know my time's run out, the Upward Bound program. The only thing I would say on that, it's been such a wonderful program, helped so many kids in my state of West Virginia. But it didn't come out until the week before deadline, and just didn't give us enough time to do the job. So if you could, sir, anything you can do on the Upward Bound program, it's a tremendous program.
Thank you.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Senator Braun.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So last September, we had a conversation, and I was educated in a great public school system in my hometown of Jasper, Indiana. We've got issues in education, and I'm a big believer that, and I think I told you, that parents should be the main stakeholder in their own kids' education, and I believe there should be choice along the way. We had an election that transpired in Virginia where that was the key issue, and I asked you then if that was something you'd be comfortable saying. Are the parents the most important part in a kid's education, their own kid's education, K through 12? Have you reconsidered kind of your stance on that?
Senator, for the last over 2 decades of serving as an educator, I've always felt teachers and parents have to work together, and parents are the most influential and most important teachers that our children have. So yes, parents are the most important partner with educators, and they know their children most. So schools are more effective when parent voice is incorporated in every aspect of learning.
Well, I'm glad to see that maybe that's changed a bit.
Never changed, sir.
I think it's the cornerstone of how things work.
Yeah.
Coming to the idea of choice, we had a public school system to where that was almost a moot point that was so good. Not all places have that. Part of what works in Indiana is the money follows the child, not the building, not the district, so to speak. Do you believe in that concept so that we're putting resources to the places that have the kids there? Or do you think it should be maybe the old paradigm that other places work off of, to where you're funding the school itself and not following the child?
I believe the latter. I believe we need to make sure all of our schools are well-resourced so we don't have a system of winners and losers. All schools, and this budget reflects an attempt to make sure that we're addressing inequities so that we don't have schools where students attend and maybe they're not taking advantage of different options that they have. We have to make sure all schools provide all students with high-quality education.
So you do believe in the money following the child?
No,
Or not? You
no.
don't.
I believe that
Okay.
we need to fund public schools so
Okay.
that every student that attends a public school can have a high-quality education.
And regardless, though, of what the performance is at that given school, that parents may not be happy about if they don't have other options.
Sir, I believe there has to be an equal part support and accountability, right? So you provide adequate resources, adequate professional learning opportunities, but then there has to be an equivalent amount of oversight and accountability to make sure that those schools are producing. And I understand that in some cases that's not happening. And that's why I'm a big believer in making sure we're disaggregating data to make sure that some subgroups of students are not receiving a poor education. But that's also why in this budget, sir, I put requests for Title I, IDEA, to make sure that those students with additional needs get the support that they need.
So in traveling Indiana, pre-COVID and especially exacerbated by COVID, workforce. Do you think there's enough emphasis being put on career and technical education for the high-demand, high-wage jobs that are mostly out there in Indiana? We got great post-secondary institutions there, but we're starving for a better high school education that's going to give you at least life skills regardless of what you want to do.
Sir, I couldn't agree with you more. I don't think we're doing enough. We need to do better. We need to evolve our high schools to make sure that there are better career pathways. In the budget, we propose $200 million for career-connected pathways for that same reason, for students in Indiana to have options when they graduate. They can go to a good, high-paying, high-skilled job because there's a good connection with our workforce partners. They can go to a 2-year school to level up on their skills, or they could go to a 4-year school. But then those skills that they get should be transferable into high-paying jobs in the community that they live. I'm strongly in support of that.
I'm glad to see that that is your point of view, because sadly, when I looked into it, some guidance counselors were stigmatizing that pathway as not being one worthwhile pursuing. Brings me to my final question. The high cost of post-secondary education. $1.7 trillion in debt is the manifestation of what that is about.
Yeah.
We've only got one university president across the country that I think is paying any attention to it. Mitch Daniels at Purdue has held tuition flat, I think, for around 9 years. What are we going to do to address how expensive post-secondary education has gotten, and what do we do to disrupt the system to make it more within reach for those that choose to go that direction?
Thank you, Senator. I couldn't agree with you more. We have to fix that system. We increased the college scorecard requirements. We're meeting with institutions of higher education and saying this has to change. We have an Office of Enforcement at FSA. We recognize that college needs to be a good return on investment, and we're working really hard to fix a system that has led to like a runaway train of costs.
Well, that's good, because to solve the problem, you got to lower the cost, and that begs the question of how we accumulate so much debt in the process. So, thank you.
Thank you.
Senator Schatz.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Secretary, for being here. Let me just start with an easy one. I think it's an easy one. Would arming teachers make schools safer?
No.
Can you elaborate a bit?
Look, our educators over the last 2 years have bent over backwards for our students. To think that arming our teachers and now having them be responsible for discharging a firearm in our schools, it's just ludicrous to think about. I think it's a further reflection of the lack of respect that this profession has, and I would stand against that. That is not the way to move forward.
Thank you for that. What's your view of online learning? We're in a new phase of this pandemic. I'll just give you my prejudices here. I just think it didn't work. I think it was understandable. I think we knew less about the virus, and a lot of those choices were made before the availability of the vaccine and our deeper understanding of how the virus impacts children. I think online learning was a total disaster, and I'm just interested to hear your views on this.
Sure. Having to develop a reopening plan in Connecticut when we knew very little about the pandemic, there were no vaccines. Testing took 5 days to get a response, and we didn't know transmissibility. We were working with OSHA, with epidemiologists. I think the decision to close schools and provide safe alternative was the best and the right decision. Moving quickly to reopening schools was the priority across the country. With that said, blended learning or hybrid learning is no substitute for in-person learning. I can agree with that. I do think blended learning has a role as we move forward in education, but I don't think that the transition to fully online learning worked for most students. Although for some students, a small number of students in my visits have reported that they felt more comfortable that way. The majority of students wanted to return back to in-person learning.
Amen. Let me ask you about Pell restoration and second chance Pell grants. As the department transitions from the second chance Pell pilot to the full Pell restoration, does the department plan to integrate existing pilot sites into the new prison education program to prevent a gap in education programming?
Yeah, we're proud of the increase in the second chance Pell experiment. We added, as you know, 73 additional sites. Now we're at 200, and we do look at this as an opportunity to help provide skills that could then translate into productive lives and jobs for those who are getting a second chance. And we do want to see that continue and continue to expand to close those gaps that were established, yeah.
I want to talk to you about mental health support for students. In a recent School Pulse panel, 70% of public schools reported an increase in the percentage of students seeking mental health services. And by the way, I think it's 100% of the schools having an increase in mental health challenges, 70% reporting.
Right.
And only 56% of public schools reported that their schools are able to effectively provide mental health services. We're not going to have enough money through the federal Department of Education to address this. I'm wondering how we can lift up what's working and scale it and provide it to departments of education and schools, because I don't think we can necessarily pile on.
Right.
There should be mental health resources spent, but some of this is going to be about lifting up what's already working, and I'm wondering if you can comment on that.
Sure, and I can tell you as an educator, we've never had enough mental health support available to our students. We haven't. You pile on pandemic, you pile on fears now of safety. The ratio I was in Michigan recently, the ratio between a school counselor and a student was like 700, over 700 in a particular community. That's unacceptable. So I recently was on a call with governors from different bipartisan group of governors talking about the importance at the state level also that mental health supports get elevated. It can't just be the American Rescue Plan dollars. That's insufficient. Our budget does provide funding requests for long-term help, but it's all hands on deck, states and local communities also.
Final question. Do I have your commitment to continue supporting the funding for the Native Hawaiian Education Program?
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Senator Shaheen.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Secretary Cardona, thank you for being here this morning and for your testimony. Senator Manchin talked about the Upward Bound program. I've had direct experience in New Hampshire with the Upward Bound program. When I worked at the University of New Hampshire, it's one of 2 Upward Bound programs we have, and it's actually been in existence since 1966. Keene State College is the other, in existence since 1974. These programs, like all others, have to recompete every 5 years to continue to operate Upward Bound. But I'm concerned because given that this is a predictable funding cycle for a long-standing federal program, I don't understand why the department is not able to award these grants on time. I recognize that there are challenges, when there are budget challenges with certainty around your budget, that creates a concern. But explain to me why you can't award these programs, because the delays put programs through crises. Their instructors and applicants are notified that they may not be able to get their funding. It has an impact on their ability to continue in higher education. And I I just don't understand why this continues to be such a problem.
Thank you, Senator, for highlighting the importance of TRIO programs. I couldn't agree with you more. My wife is a graduate of a TRIO program, went on to get her degree in communications, and she went back to teach at the TRIO program. So certainly I could see the benefits of that. And, you know, as Senator mentioned, and yourself, you know, there was no risk for delay with the upper bound grants. There were grantees were notified 2 weeks prior to the expiration, but what I'm hearing from you is, could that process be improved so that it's not so late? So what I'll do, Senator, is convene with my team to discuss this, and then I'll have someone from my team reach out to you about the process to see if there's anything we can do.
That would be very helpful. I know that all of those who participate in those programs would appreciate it as well.
Thank you.
I want to go back now to the issue of student loan payments. And you probably don't remember, but last year I asked you about the moratorium end date. And what you told me is that the department would try and provide some certainty on when those student loan payments would be expected to resume. Unfortunately, over that last year, the administration has made 3 last-minute extensions of the current payment moratorium. I'm sure that all of those recipients appreciate that, but it doesn't provide the kind of certainty that they really need as they're planning their lives and trying to figure out what they need to do in order to ensure that they can start making those loan payments again. So can you tell me what process is in place to try and determine when this moratorium will end and when those who need to repay their student loans are going to have to start those payments again?
Thank you. Yes, you know, the information from the Federal Reserve helps drive decisions on whether to extend or not. And we recognize that while the economy has improved, many Americans are still struggling to make ends meet and pay their bills and get their child care bills back up, their mortgage. So we felt that another extension was warranted. We do, as I said last year, want to provide our borrowers a long on-ramp so that they understand when it's going to start, to better prepare them for this process. And we have resources at the Department of Education that are available now that weren't available before to help them. So do you have any sense of when this current moratorium will end? I don't have any information now to share with you about when it would end or whether or not, you know, what the conversations are about when it's going to be lifted. I know we have a date, and it could be that it's extended or it could be that it starts there. But what I will say is that our borrowers will have ample notice, and we'll communicate that with you as well. Thank you. You talked in your opening statement about the challenges that students are facing, the mental health challenges that we're seeing with students. And one of the real issues we have, I know, across the country is not having enough professionals to address mental health challenges. Can you talk about what kind of plans the department could put in place, what kind of legislation we might need to pass in order to help address that? Yeah, thank you for that question. You know, we have an opportunity to really reimagine how we're looking at providing support for students, and there's a continuum, right? The social worker, the school social worker, the community social worker is obviously a major support, but additional funding and support for students having access to after-school programs, to good summer programming, to a mentor, those are all good ways of doing it. Supporting programs that allow high school students that are thinking about a career in social work, because it's just a shortage area, to receive incentives to go into that field and to create throughways between our K-12 systems and our four-year institutions to have these students get into these schools earlier to do field work out there while they're getting college credits. These are all creative ways that we're hearing about as I visit different states, but to incentivize that across the nation, I think we're at that point now because there's a shortage there and in many other areas. Another area is incentivizing connections between schools and community-based providers. In Connecticut, we benefited from the community health center tremendously. I've seen models where we have hospitals that are connected to school systems, and the level of care is great because there's a connection with the hospital and a 4-year university that helps train and educate these social workers. So I think there's room for growth there. I really want across the country for us to be a little bit more innovative and bold, saying that this has to be a foundational part of the educational experience.
Well, thank you. I certainly agree with that, and anything that we can do on this committee, I'm sure we stand ready.
Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Senator Baldwin.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Thank you for being here, Secretary Cardona. I wanted to start by discussing career and technical education. Despite the growing demand for CTE, federal programs supporting career education and skills training have been persistently underfunded. The President's budget proposes new innovative programs like the Career Connected High Schools grant program. However, the budget request does not have enough funding to launch these programs in every state. And the administration did not request an increase for important existing programs that are helping to build a strong workforce in my home state of Wisconsin. So I want to ask you if you can ensure, if you will ensure that the administration's new initiatives support rather than supplant the existing funding streams that are helping to connect students to skill and career-focused services.
Thank you for the advocacy on behalf of that important and often pushed aside component of education. I believe it was Senator Braun who mentioned that in some cases it's not looked at as a viable option. And I can tell you, as a technical high school graduate myself, leaving high school with options helps the students, the community. So I'm a big proponent of really, just like with mental health, reimagining what career-connected high schools and programming that are connected to our workforce partners, to the regional needs in the community, to our 2-year schools, 4-year schools, that has to be systematized across the country. And while this $200 million proposal is for competitive awards, I recognize that the support that those communities that are trying to do this has to increase as well. So I will continue to advocate and find ways to support those programs and find ways to make whatever new money available eligible to those who are already doing some of this work.
Thank you. You've had a number of discussions already on student debt. It's a burden for many students in Wisconsin. But part of it is made worse by predatory behavior of those who target students struggling to make ends meet. That's why I was proud to introduce and witness the passage of the Stop Student Debt Relief Scams, or STOP Act. That created criminal penalties for unauthorized access of student loan information. And an important part of that bill was the creation of a third-party data access system to ensure that there is a safe and secure way for legitimate actors like legal aid groups to easily and efficiently access the information that borrowers want them to have. Secretary Cardona, what actions has the Department of Education taken to implement the STOP Act, and when can we expect to see the designated third-party access system up and running?
Thank you for your hard work to protect students from scams out there on debt relief. We are faithfully implementing the STOP Act, and some of the ways we're doing that is we're implementing that third-party access form as required by the STOP Act. We're working with the Investigator General to notify victims of fraud. We're updating the FSA website to allow borrowers to access their information more quickly. And these are just some ways that we're trying to improve services for those who have loans out there and make the information more open and transparent.
But do you know when that third-party access system will be up and running?
We are currently implementing that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Multiple reports and investigations have found that nearly 70 years since Brown versus Board of Education decision, schools in Milwaukee and Waukesha remain some of the most segregated in the nation. Despite prior intervention by the Department of Education, suspension and expulsion rates at Milwaukee Public Schools remain deeply unequal. Every child in Wisconsin, regardless of their zip code, income, or background, deserves the opportunity to learn and thrive in a school that is safe and supportive. But sadly, these reports suggest that we have a lot of work left to do to realize that goal. While the causes of educational inequality are complex, we cannot expect our state and local partners to carry this burden on their own. What is the Department of Education doing to address persistent inequities in education, and how are you working with state and local partners to secure better learning environments for all children in Wisconsin?
Thank you. As an educator, I can tell you, and the research proves it, students learn better when they're in a diverse environment. In our budget, we requested $100 million to have new competitive grants to provide better programs that provide more racially and socially and economically diverse schools and classrooms. It's something that we pay very close attention to, and we want to make sure that all students in all schools achieve at high levels, which is why in our funding proposals we also ask for additional funds to some of those schools where they may not be performing as well, Title I schools that are disproportionately underperforming. We are supporting it. We do have it in our proposal, and we continue to monitor. If we feel that students are not being given opportunities or schools are used to segregate students, we also accept investigation requests in our Office for Civil Rights.
Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Secretary, our nation's students have been through a lot in the past few years, as you well know, and it's done a lot of harm to their learning, their mental health, their development. And as you are aware, the American Rescue Plan provided $122 billion under the Elementary and Secondary School Emergency Relief Fund to give our schools more resources to safely offer in-person instruction, address the academic, social, and emotional needs of students, and support evidence-based strategies to tackle learning loss and help students get back on track, particularly those disproportionately impacted by the pandemic. I know that over the past month, your staff has worked really hard to review the state implementation plans and help local school districts meet those requirements. Can you tell us what evidence-based practices you're seeing making the biggest difference in helping our students catch up?
I definitely can, and I can tell you from experience myself, Deputy Secretary Martin has been traveling the country too, seeing firsthand how the American Rescue Plan dollars are being used. The higher ed level as well, Undersecretary Kowal has seen many great examples. And I have to tell you, I'm proud of our educators, I'm proud of our students, I'm proud of our parents who have gone through such a disruption and are looking at our schools now as that sense of community that they lost, and students are thriving. Yes, they need help. It's not going to be a quick fix, but when I visit White Plains and I see that they focus on improved ventilations, which increase the confidence of the community to go back into the schools, I know that the money's being used well. I remember going to Oregon and seeing a summer program that was 3 times the size it was the previous time they held it because of the American Rescue Plan dollars. I've seen high-quality, high-dosage tutoring implemented in communities where students missed out on school for a long time, and they're catching these students up. We talk a lot about mental health support, but without question, we must focus on the academic recovery of our students, the literacy, the numeracy, and school systems are providing extended school days, smaller class sizes, additional support teachers, better parent liaison strategies. I remember visiting a school, I think it was Nevada, where they hired an additional group of parent liaisons that went out into the community, those communities where the students were chronically absent or not engaged as much because of the impacts of the pandemic, and they got those families back into the school. Wraparound services. I'm seeing such good use of the American Rescue Plan dollars. We wouldn't be at 99% of our schools open full-time if it weren't for the American Rescue Plan. I'd be talking to you now about colleges closing, about students that we can't find if it weren't for the American Rescue Plan dollars. And I can tell you, Future Ed reported $30 billion going toward academic recovery and $26 billion going toward additional staff, which help academic and mental health. $3 billion a month is being used to support our students, and I'm thankful that we have that funds. Thank you for the support of them.
Yeah, I think that we're seeing a really diverse use of those needs across the country. And I think over the long term, it'd be very interesting to go back and see which ones really did help kids academically or mentally, and what made a real difference in their lives and getting back on track.
Yeah. Thank you.
Let me go to higher education again, and I'm talking more than tuition, fees, and books, because if we want to really help our students, none of them should be worried about where they're going to get their next meal, or how they're going to put a roof over their head, or how they're going to afford childcare or get mental health care, because those are barriers to them to be able to get a degree. Yet we know that 3 in 5 higher education students face housing or food insecurity, and 2 in 5 students drop out of college, do so because of financial pressures. And those are, of course, connected to mental health challenges as well. So significantly expanding federal student aid, including doubling the Pell Grant, is a big part of a solution to that. But so are programs that are specifically targeted at addressing those students' basic needs. I wanted to ask you how the department is using funds we provided that included both annually appropriated funding and COVID supplemental funding to meet students' basic needs, connecting students to other federal benefits like child tax credit or SNAP.
Yes. Some of the best stories from my visits are those students who have benefited from those funds. I remember talking to a gentleman who was in a 2-year program at a community college, and he was sharing all his progress. And he went back to school a little bit later in life. Later in the story, he shared he was homeless, and that the college provided him with meals, with help so that he could have a place to stay, so he's not sleeping in his car, and he can continue to get that degree. I was just floored by that. The $198 million for basic needs as part of the American Rescue Plan, I've seen examples of that working. I remember visiting Bergen Community College and announcing that, and talking to a student who was able to continue her studies because there were childcare costs that were covered on campus. Right. So her twins could be cared for while she continues to get her degree. So those funds are being used to help folks change the trajectory not only of their life, but of their children's lives. And I've seen great examples of that. And any dollar that goes to that is used to help them stay in school, help them get better earning potential, help them take care of some of those basic needs that are critical.
Great, very good. Okay, thank you. Senator Blunt.
Thank you, Chair. On student loans again, though, this would be collecting the student loans, not forgiving the student loans. Mm-hmm. In the FY21 appropriations bill, the first one you had as secretary, we put money in, we gave authority there to extend the current loan collection agreements, which I believe you did. You extended them through December of next year. What's your plan to go ahead and move forward on defining what those agreements will look like and issuing the agreements? And does your plan include the likelihood of a bid protest? We can run through a timeline pretty quickly that gets beyond December 23 if we're not thinking about this. So what's your plan for collecting the student loans that will be collected?
Thank you. So what we're not going to do is go to a single servicer system. We're pursuing long-term servicing contracts to maintain that long-term stability of the loan servicing environment, increase the accountability, make sure that we improve cybersecurity, improve borrower experiences too. That's a critical part of it. The borrower experience and outcomes. Obviously, we have partners in the process that we want to engage in this work, and we'll be communicating with them so that they have information on what we're expecting in order for them to be a part of that process.
So you would still anticipate having a significant number of different servicers?
We do plan on having different servicers, yes.
And when do you think you'll issue whatever sort of proposal you need to as to what those contracts would look like?
You know, what I'll do is I'll have my team has more specific information reach back out to you about the timeline for that.
All right. I'd like to see that. And Chair, I'll probably have some other questions for the record, but I think that's all I have for today.
Thank you very much, and that will end our hearing today, and I want to thank you, Secretary Cardona, for a very thoughtful discussion about how we can support our students and our educators in our schools. This is so important to me and families across my state and the country, so I'm going to continue to keep pushing to make sure that every child in this country receives a safe, high-quality public education and that our students and families can access affordable, high-quality post-secondary education. With that, for any senators who wish to ask additional questions, questions for the record will be due June 17th, 5 p.m. Hearing record will also remain open until then for members who do wish to submit additional materials for the record. The committee will next meet in Dirksen 138 Wednesday, June 15th at 9:30 for a hearing on the Biden administration's budget request for the Department of Labor. Hearing is closed.